Most people think George S. Patton's 2 revolvers were theater, props for a loud general who loved attention. But the image was born not in World War II, not in front of cameras, and not for intimidation. It was born in a dry Mexican desert when a 30-year-old lieutenant ran out of bullets. On the morning of May 14, 1916, Patton rode into hostile territory with a small detachment pursuing Pancho Villa's raiders. 20 yards away, 3 armed men turned and fired. Patton emptied his Colt single-action Army .45, 5 shots gone in seconds. Then came the silence. As Patton fumbled to reload, 3 bullets cracked past his head, close enough to feel the air move. He later admitted that in those seconds, standing exposed, revolver empty, he understood something that would never leave him. A soldier who runs out of options dies first. The twin revolvers people would later mock were born right there, before Patton was famous, before the helmets, the speeches, or the legend. And the truth behind them is far more practical than anyone realizes.
The U.S. Army in 1916 did not train officers for fast reloads under fire. Revolvers were reliable, but slow. Patton learned this the hard way during America's first motorized military assault, when he personally volunteered to accompany General John J. Pershing into Mexico. Patton was not supposed to be leading from the front. He was Pershing's aide, but ambition and curiosity pushed him forward. That morning, intelligence suggested Villa's men were nearby. Patton took 3 soldiers, commandeered vehicles, and moved fast, faster than doctrine allowed. When the gunfight erupted, Patton did what training told him: fire until the threat stopped. But the design of a single-action revolver demanded time he didn't have. Reloading meant opening the loading gate, ejecting spent cases one by one, inserting fresh rounds the same way. That pause nearly killed him. Later, Patton did not romanticize the moment. He analyzed it. The problem was not courage, it was mechanics. And Patton, more than anything else, believed war was solved by mechanics, preparation, and redundancy. From that day forward, Patton adopted a personal rule, long before it became a slogan: 2 is 1, 1 is none.
By World War II, the image had hardened into legend. Patton with 2 ivory-handled revolvers, gleaming beneath polished stars. But here is where most videos get it wrong. Patton did not always carry ivory. One revolver, often a Colt single-action Army .45, did have ivory grips. The other, frequently a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum, at times carried grips made from plexiglass, sourced from aircraft windshields, and dyed white. His own driver later confirmed this. The appearance mattered, but not for vanity. Patton wanted instant visual confirmation. White grips were visible in low light. 2 revolvers meant no reload under fire. If one failed, the other worked. If one emptied, the second answered immediately. He was obsessive about this. Staff officers noted that if Patton wore one sidearm visibly, another was hidden. If 2 were visible, a third was nearby. Not paranoia, procedure. This was the same man who personally studied tank recovery, fuel flow, and road discipline. The revolvers were not costume. They were system design.
Critics often argue that no serious officer would carry ivory-handled weapons in combat. Yet Patton's own troops tell a different story. Members of the U.S. Third Army recalled that Patton frequently left headquarters disguised in plain enlisted clothing, accompanied only by his driver, to conduct personal reconnaissance beyond the front lines. No press, no ceremony, just observation. His hand-drawn maps, still archived today, prove it. The revolvers were rarely fired in World War II. That is the point critics miss. They were not for gunfights. They were insurance, symbols of a lesson learned early and never forgotten. Patton believed that leadership meant eliminating avoidable failure, equipment failure, training failure, human hesitation. The image endured because it was honest, not about fearlessness, but about preparation. And only now, at the end, can we say this with certainty. Patton didn't carry 2 revolvers to look dangerous. He carried them because once, on May 14, 1916, being unprepared almost killed him.
Patton's lesson in redundancy did not stay with revolvers. It followed him into every command he ever held. By the late 1930s, the U.S. Army was still mentally rooted in horse cavalry. Patton was not. He had spent years studying European mechanization, particularly German armored doctrine. What fascinated him was not speed, it was continuity, momentum maintained by planning for failure before it occurred. Engines would break, radios would fail, officers would be killed. Patton believed command structures must absorb shock without stopping. That belief, born in Mexico, became doctrine. When war came, Patton insisted on spare vehicles, overlapping commands, redundant supply routes, and decentralized execution. Critics called it excess. Patton called it survival. The 2 revolvers were simply the most visible symbol of a deeper principle. Never let a single point of failure decide your fate.
By 1942, Patton understood something few American generals grasped. Appearance influences behavior. He did not wear the revolvers to intimidate the enemy. He wore them for his own troops. Soldiers remembered him instantly. They listened. They believed he embodied action, not hesitation. This was deliberate, but not theatrical. Patton believed soldiers fought harder when they trusted their commander to be decisive under pressure. The revolvers communicated readiness, finality, no pause, no delay. Importantly, Patton never claimed the image made him brave. He insisted discipline did. His speeches reinforced this again and again. Fear was natural. Preparation was mandatory. The revolvers were not props. They were visual doctrine, a reminder to himself and others that hesitation kills faster than bullets.
Despite popular belief, Patton almost never fired a revolver in World War II. That fact confuses modern audiences, but it shouldn't. A general's revolver was not meant for gunfights. It was for last resort continuity of command. Patton stayed close to the front, but not recklessly so. His weapon existed in the narrow space between order and chaos, if communications collapsed, if vehicles were hit, if command dissolved. Many veterans of the Third Army later noted that Patton's real weapon was not his sidearm, but his ability to appear exactly where the crisis was unfolding, calm, focused, demanding. The revolvers remained holstered because Patton's planning worked. Redundancy prevented the moments where desperation would be needed. In Patton's mind, the best weapon was the one never drawn.
After the war, the image hardened into cliché. The revolvers were dismissed as vanity. The grips debated endlessly. Ivory, plastic, or MIF. Some critics insisted no professional officer would carry such weapons into combat at all. But the historical record tells a narrower, more disciplined story. Patton never claimed the revolvers made him invincible. He never argued they were practical for firefights. He rarely discussed them at all. That silence matters. To Patton, weapons were tools. Tools either worked or they failed. His earlier experience in Mexico taught him that reloading under pressure was a failure point, not a test of courage. The revolvers addressed that one problem, nothing more. When veterans of the Third Army later described Patton, they did not speak of showmanship. They spoke of predictability under stress, of a commander who arrived prepared every time. The myth grew because it was visible. The truth stayed buried because it was mundane.
Patton's habits often preceded official doctrine. Long before redundancy became a formal principle of modern military planning, Patton practiced it instinctively. Spare fuel, spare vehicles, alternate routes, overlapping authority. He demanded that subordinate commanders prepare for the moment when plans failed, not if, but when. This mindset frustrated peers. It required more work, more foresight, more accountability, but it produced formations that could recover faster than their enemies. The revolvers were simply habit made visible, a personal discipline translated into leadership style. Patton did not trust chance. He trusted preparation, repeated until it became instinct.
To the soldiers who served under him, the revolvers required no explanation. They understood that Patton demanded from himself what he demanded from them, readiness without excuse. Veterans later recalled that Patton arrived early, inspected personally, and corrected details others overlooked. Equipment was checked, routes memorized, alternatives planned. The revolvers were not symbols of violence. They were symbols of no excuses. If the general carried backups, so should everyone else, mentally and materially. That message required no speech.
In modern retellings, Patton's revolvers are often reduced to trivia, but the reason they still provoke debate is because they force an uncomfortable question. How much preparation is enough? Patton's answer was simple and unforgiving. Enough is when failure has been removed wherever possible. The revolvers were never meant to inspire imitation. They were meant to eliminate one specific risk Patton refused to face again. That is why the story endures, not because of the object, but because of the thinking behind it.
When stripped of myth, criticism, and exaggeration, the truth is almost disappointingly practical. Patton carried 2 revolvers because once, on May 14, 1916, being unprepared nearly cost him his life. He never allowed that condition to exist again. The image survived because it was honest. It represented a lesson learned the hard way and applied without compromise. Not bravado, not theater, just preparation, made permanent. And that, more than any speech or slogan, explains why the revolvers were never for show.
George Patton rarely clarified his own image. That silence was not oversight, it was philosophy. Patton believed explanations weakened authority. A commander should be understood through results, not justification. He allowed rumors to circulate, knowing that speculation often carried more power than correction. The revolvers benefited from that silence. They became shorthand for decisiveness, even if the reality was quieter and more technical. Patton never denied the image. He simply never discussed it. That restraint is telling. It suggests the revolvers mattered far less to him than the behavior they represented. Preparation did not require defense. It spoke for itself. Military history often confuses symbols for causes. Patton's revolvers were not the source of his effectiveness. They were a visible artifact of a deeper system, one built on anticipation, redundancy, and refusal to accept preventable failure. Modern doctrine would later formalize these principles. Patton practiced them decades earlier, intuitively and personally. The danger of focusing on the symbol is misunderstanding the lesson. Many imitate the image. Few adopt the discipline behind it. Patton did not win campaigns because he carried 2 revolvers. He carried 2 revolvers because he had already learned how campaigns are lost.
After Patton's death in December 1945, the image stopped evolving. Photographs, memoirs, and later films fixed him in a single posture, helmet polished, revolvers gleaming, jaw set. Complexity gave way to simplicity. This freeze-frame version was easier to remember than the real man, analytical, disciplined, deeply historical in his thinking. The revolvers survived because they were visual. The planning, the redundancy, the discipline were not. Over time, the object replaced the idea.
Professional soldiers and historians tend to notice something different. They note that Patton's operations rarely stalled, that his formations recovered quickly from disruption, that his command style absorbed chaos rather than amplified it. These outcomes were not accidental. They were the product of a mindset shaped early by a single moment when Patton stood exposed, weapon empty, understanding that bravery without preparation is a gamble. The revolvers were never the story. They were a reminder. And reminders, when taken seriously, can shape an entire career.
Contrary to popular belief, Patton was not fearless. His private writings reveal a man acutely aware of failure, personal, professional, and historical. What he feared most was not death, but unpreparedness. The idea of being caught without options haunted him far more than enemy fire. That fear shaped his habits. It drove his insistence on rehearsal, contingency, and discipline. It explains why small details mattered so deeply to him. The revolvers fit squarely within this mindset. They were not talismans against fear. They were safeguards against repetition, against ever reliving the moment when hesitation nearly cost him everything.
The U.S. Army eventually learned what Patton learned early. Post-war doctrine emphasized redundancy, overlapping command, and rapid recovery from disruption. These principles are now standard, not exceptional. They exist because history proved their necessity. Patton was not unique in understanding this. He was simply early. And he internalized the lesson personally, not abstractly. The revolvers were an individual expression of a lesson the institution would later adopt formally.
Removing the revolvers from the story does not diminish Patton, it clarifies him. What remains is a commander defined not by appearance, but by preparation, not by bravado, but by discipline. The image persists because it is easy to remember. The thinking behind it requires effort. And effort, unlike legend, does not reproduce itself.
Every story has an origin. For Patton, it was a brief exchange of gunfire in the Mexican desert, unremarkable in scale, decisive in consequence. 3 bullets passing close enough to be remembered for life. That moment did not make him famous. It did not make him powerful. It made him careful. From that day forward, Patton designed his life around eliminating the conditions that allowed such vulnerability to exist. The revolvers followed him not as trophies, but as reminders.
When the noise fades and the image is stripped away, the reason remains simple. George S. Patton carried 2 revolvers because once, when it mattered, one was not enough. Everything else, the legend, the criticism, the debate, came later. The revolvers were not about intimidation. They were not about ego. They were not about theatrics. They were about never being unready again. And that is why, even now, the image endures, not as spectacle, but as a lesson quietly carried forward.